center of the flower bloom. Creatures of the universe, mother of the ultimate heights, the queens of the earth rise. We shall sing to your wounds, pray you back to might, lift you to the light. Prophetess, ancestress of sacredness, songstress of the dark forest, lover to the resonant, chanter of constant justice. Creatures of the universe, mother of the ultimate heights, the queens of the earth rise. We shall sing to your wounds, pray back to might, lift you to the light, the light, the light, the light, the light. Lift you to
Aloha kako, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, as you can tell, and just rocking and rolling here with getting us our visuals. And thank you, Mapuana, for starting us off here. I'm gonna hand it off to you. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. Kalamai.
Kalamai. Mahalo, Stacy. Aloha, aloha kako mai ke anu o ka au hiki na nei, a hiki ka olu o ka paiaina o Hawaii ala. So aloha, everybody. From the freezing East Coast, I have some inspiration image of where I'd rather be right now. And I want to thank Stacy Onipa'a Young for all the work she does to create this Mauli Ola series. Welcome to this Mauli Ola program of Halavai. And Halavai is a New York-based nonprofit connecting our communities in Hawaii and the Pacific to those of us who are freezing right now on the East Coast. We are very thrilled to have a conversation today. I am Roberta Uno, or Mapuana, and I am a board member of Halavai, but also working with the two wonderful, inspiring women that are joining me in conversation today. So we have Lori Pourier, who is the president of the First Peoples Fund, and also Kumu Vicky Holt Takamine of the Pa'i Foundation. And I think for me, looking out across the arts field in America, these are two really blazing change makers. And, you know, for decades, these two women have been really carrying culture, but also carrying the change that we all need to see and that we are all part of. So today we're talking about an enormous project that was really the vision of Lori Pourier from the First Peoples Fund, celebrating the 25th anniversary of First Peoples, and as part of the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, DC. So I'm going to turn first to you, Lori. And yeah, I mean, you must have the craziest dreams of anybody I know, but can you tell us about your dreaming of this and just what the vision of We the Peoples Before is, and also if you can talk to us a bit about First Peoples Fund for those who don't know.
Hamitakeapi Makasi Tony Omani Wi Imachiapi Lori. And I am Oglala Lakota, and I've known these women for a very long time. And I would first say how we got to the Kennedy Center was really because of an introduction that Roberta Uno made at the time. So yes, it's a big, long time dream, but I think it's really led by so many folks, you know, and so many Community Spirit Awards of First Peoples Fund. I'll just say about First Peoples Fund, we've been around for 25 years now. I've been a part of the organization for 23 years. I was born and raised on Pine Ridge from this area. I'm checking in here from the beautiful Heisapa, the Black Hills. And it's probably 50 degrees here today, maybe Roberta, a little bit more cold than it was yesterday, but we switched weather out here. And so I want to say that our work really is centered in community, in tribal communities across the country. And we have probably worked over now in 70 some tribal communities through our partnerships with Native Community Development Financial Institutions. And that's how we also met Vicky here, my sister Kumu Vicky. And this event really came about, my brother Carlton Turner reminded me that we had this vision way back when we were a part of a collaborative through the Ford Foundation and the DeVos Institute. And we would find ourselves talking on the side of like, how does this look in our community? You know, how does this work look like in our community, and these learnings that we were getting? And Carlton reminded me that, you know, that was a vision we had 10 years ago now to basically take over the Kennedy Center. And Roberta will get more into what that entails, but it's a vision to re-indigenize the space of the Kennedy Center. It's their 50th. We had no idea it was their 50th and our 25th, but in conversations with Mark Bamuthi Joseph and James Cass and others is how we landed on this wonderful partnership that we have now with the entire team, social impact team at the Kennedy Center. And many folks know Mark Bamuthi Joseph, a good friend of all of ours, and a theater person himself, and just a good person. So when we found out he joined the Kennedy Center a couple years ago, we knew this was possible because we knew he understood, really the importance of lifting up First Peoples across this nation, lifting up our voices, but telling our stories, and also really telling our narrative of tribal nations, in this country, but from a place of centeredness around the culture bearers, the tradition keepers, the knowledge keepers of tribal communities. And so a huge part of the storytelling is how do we lift up someone like Kumu Vicky, who has been giving selflessly in her community now for 30 years, and teaching and passing on knowledge and sharing, with others in community through the halau and through direct action and through activism. And so it's just, wonderful that we have the opportunity to tell her story on stage, their narrative on stage. And so I'll stop there, Roberta, pause, because I can get going. So I want to introduce in a good way Kumu Vicky, who is a Community Spirit Award honoree of First Peoples Fund, who knew our founder dearly, Jennifer Easton, who this award is named after, the Jennifer Easton Community Spirit Award. And Jeffy, as we call her, was with us until a few years ago. But basically, she gave all of her resources to Indian country, including buffalo restoration in our area, including the Sundance Film Festival, supporting that work for many years, and First Peoples Fund, even down to always buying the work of the Community Spirit Award honorees and all of her years of being on this earth with us. And she has since made her journey, but at the heart of everything at First Peoples Fund is honoring and lifting up the voices and sharing their knowledge, with the world outside of their communities and their leadership. So I think I'm supposed to introduce Kumu Vicky now and just share a little bit about our history and our work together, Vicky. And you.
Yes. Yes. Aloha mai kako o wau ahana ka ulani o Kamamalu o wau ke kumuhula o Pua Ali Ilima ke po'o o Pa'i Foundation. And there's a large truck right outside my door. So if you hear horn tooting and truck, e kalamai. It's that time of the day. So aloha mai kako, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and see so many familiar faces on the participant list. I'm checking out the attendees list to see how many of my haumana are present. So yes, I'm one of those. Yeah. Thank you, Erica. And those, and yeah, and I see Michelle. Anyway, I was privileged to meet Roberta Uno when I became a grantee of Ford Foundation, and Laurie Pourier was at one of my first meetings at Ford Foundation, and the two of them were in the same room. Laurie and I were at the table, and Roberta was sitting down as a staff member, wanting to come in to meet some of the awardees that were the first awardees that Ford had granted funds for Native Americans, Alaskan, and Hawaiians. And Laurie and I were part of that first grant under Betsy Richards. And that's where I met Laurie Pourier and first met so many wonderful people that we've met over the years. And Laurie and I immediately bonded as a two Native, well, there are a lot of other Native women, but it just seemed like we just gravitated to each other. And as we met over other meetings over the years, we also met with other grantees of Roberta's, Maria De Leon at NALAC and Carlton Turner at First Peoples at Alternate Roots. And we had so much fun sharing and learning with each other. I felt like I was learning so much from all of them. I kind of feel that Lori was one of my mentors. Roberta was one of my mentors in growing my nonprofit. We were young in this field. I had no idea what I was doing when I started Pa'i Foundation. I was just going by the guts, you know, it's one of those guts. I'm just going to do this and just follow my gut feeling and follow my heart and make my own path. And along the way, I met these two lovely ladies who kind of helped to nurture and groom and also guide me and Pa'i along the way. So I look at both of these women in the room here as two very strong, very powerful and influential women in our field. As I got to know Lori and First Peoples Fund much better, I understood the work that she was doing in support of Native Americans all across the nation. And as I followed her around the country, we kind of tagged along. We went on a bus tour throughout Indian country, through the Black Hills, and I learned so much more about my own Native American heritage that I still don't feel. I'm a little bit of Cherokee on my mom's side, but I was born and raised in Hawaii. And so my grandmother, all I know is hula and Hawaiian culture. So very little about my Native American culture that I've begun to learn from Lori as I palled around with her. I think for me, when I met Jennifer Easton at one of the Community Spirit Awardees receptions, she was so humble. She was such a tiny person, but with such a big, big heart. And that's what I see with Lori and First Peoples Fund. They're not that big of an organization, but they have the biggest heart. And so that's what I feel about the Community Spirit Awards. It's that they honor these artists that just do their work and celebrate their own community, but have these big hearts that share, that have a larger impact on the community. And I think that's what the Community Spirit Awards, when I was honored with that, we're the ones that really don't toot our own horn. We don't like to talk about ourselves. Native peoples, we don't like to do that. And so when you're forced to do that, and so I was nominated for this Community Spirit Award, and then I had to write about myself. And I was like, I don't like to do that. But I learned that this is something that we have to do with other Native people. We have to help others to write about themselves. And so that's what I've been doing for the last few years, is helping artists, reviewing their arts applications and helping them to talk about themselves. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned from both Roberta and Lori, how to write about ourselves, how to be proud of what we do and share that message. And I think that that's what First Peoples Fund has done for the Community Spirit Awardees. They put them on this platform and they're like, you guys got to do this. You folks have to talk about yourselves and you have to lift your own community, and we're going to help you do that. And so I've been on this path with Lori and Roberta for the past 10 years at least. And so excited to celebrate with her and be honored to be invited to share a little about our culture at the 25th anniversary celebration, We the Peoples Before, at the Kennedy Center in February. So I'm hoping that all of you will come and join us. And we look forward to sharing a little bit about Hawaii with all our other Native American cousins from all across the nation, from Alaska to, I don't know, I know we're Sky, so we're the Sky people. We're going to talk about, guess what? Mauna Kea. Oh, yes. And along with so we're bringing Jamaica Osorio with us, who's written some beautiful poetry. Robert Cazimero, Uluvehi Cazimero, that's going to do a song that was written about Jamaica when she was shackled to the road to prevent the development and the TMT development of the observatory. And so we're going to talk about Mauna Kea, our sacred mountain, as we are all out there protecting our vahipana, our sacred sites. So I'm honored and privileged to be a part of this celebration with Laurie and Roberta. And I think I'm going to toss it over to Roberta, who can share a little bit more about, we just finished a residency. So Roberta's been going around with the other groups that are performing and doing a residency with us. And Laurie was able to come in with Roberta and get some vitamin D, which I hear is the one thing that most people do not get enough of. So we have lots of that. We don't suffer from that. We get plenty of vitamin D over here. So if you want vitamin D, come to Hawaii. I'm happy to host. And you come over anytime. You guys all know that, right? So, but Laurie and Roberta were here in December with we practiced our little section. We're very excited to share our section about the sky on Mauna Kea. So I'm going to toss it over to Roberta and carry it on.
Yeah, that was so wonderful to be with you at the Pa'i space and to be with Kumu Jeffrey, Kumu Robert, Jamaica, Heʻoli, Osorio, and the dancers from Halau. So I guess what I will say is Laurie called me up, I don't know, it was well over a year ago. And I think it was even before COVID, and started telling me that she wanted to do this Kennedy Center takeover, and that the people, you know, the leadership there, like everywhere, changes happening. They were evolving. And Mark Bamuthi Joseph being there as a vice president and artistic director of social impact, and Robert Van Leer being there as the senior vice president of artistic programming, made this partnership with Laurie to begin to really, you know, explore what re-indigenizing could possibly mean to a historically white institution like that. And I want Laurie later to talk more about all the other programming activities of the 3 days, but I'll just talk about the production itself. It's February 4th. And, you know, Laurie originally handed me this long list of artists and said, I want all these artists to be in it. And then COVID happened and I figured we weren't doing it. And then she called me and said, well, I think we're going to go ahead with it. Well, how could we do this? So Laurie and I began a long dramaturgy process where talking to her about her vision, hearing her stories, and then talking to elders, talking to rights lawyers, Indian rights lawyers, talking to cultural practitioners, and really thinking about, you know, we're doing this in the heart of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., which has been such a site of historic trauma for Native peoples. So the importance of kind of grounding this story in federal Indian law, but without making it a lecture. And, you know, that's a big challenge. Like, okay, how do we get that, some information, you know, how does that enter into this, right? So anyway, from talking to all those different really generous, good-hearted people, they just kept bringing us back to a space of prayer and spirituality and feeling, this heart space, as we came to, you know, refer to. And so it became pretty natural that it felt that creating this piece in the directions of prayer, starting in the east, then going south, then west, then north, and then sky, and returning to Grandmother Earth. And that also became a way to start organizing the performance where, you know, instead of having 48 performers like going in this, you know, whatever long, you know, kind of showcase, how could we organize the performers around the themes of those 6 directions? So Laurie and I always laugh because, you know, every time she mentioned Hawaii, she'd say, and then we go to the west and it's Hawaii. And I'm like, no, Hawaii is west of here, but Hawaii is going to be one of the sky stories because of thinking about Mauna Kea and, you know, the protests against the building of the telescope, the use of, the stars in terms of wayfinding. It felt like Hawaii needed to be there. And it's also in the sky section with the Lakota star knowledge story following right behind it, which brings us back to Earth. Yeah, so just to say, and maybe Stacy can show some of the pictures. I've been, I don't know, I say running the COVID gauntlet since September, just ducking and weaving, but I just came from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we worked with Zuni, Pueblo, and Hopi dancers and storytellers, and the person wearing the land back sweatshirt is my assistant director, Kenny Ramos. And then, yeah, just can flip through these pictures. That's one of our groups that rehearsed together at the Kennedy Center, including in the middle, Purafe of Ulali. Ulali is going to be one of the holding down the music with Wade Fernandez with the cap. And there's Bamuti on the left. And when Lori talked about her brother, Carlton, he's there in the red. So we can keep flipping through here. And that's from Hawaii. So let's see, we've got Albuquerque, DC, Honolulu, and these are some of the dancers, and Kumu Robert and Heʻoli. And Lori was there with us, which was so very special. Only Kumu Jeffrey's missing from that, but he'll be in DC. This was our very first residency. This was in Minneapolis in, I can't even remember when, I think September. And this, it was very special. This has our both oldest and youngest members of this cast. You just see the people starting on the left in the back row, going 6 people over. That is 4 generations of jingle dress dancers with great-grandmother Mary Lyons, the second from left, and she's surrounded by her great-granddaughters, the youngest of whom is 10. And we're also with Sharon Day and Liz Jacola, CSA awardee. And this was also with the Ikitowan Youth Theater. So there's some high school age actors here. But this section really focuses on the women water walkers story from Sharon Day, and also the issue of missing, murdered, and Indigenous women. And let's see.
That was Liz DeCola, also in there, Community Spirit Award honoree.
Yes, yep. And then this one is from Rapid City, where this is a whole group of poets and spoken word and rap artists. And yes, they are going to be holding down the story of the of Earth, of coming back to Grandmother Earth, and really those issues of protecting the earth and, our stewardship of the land. And I think that might be it. I went 6 different, well, no, because there was also New York. I forgot about, this is at La Mama Theater. Some of you know 47 Great Jones rehearsal rooms, but there, and with Purafe again, Monique Mojica and Kenny, who are our 2 main actor storytellers. And then on the far right is Dwayne Toma, who's the language teacher for the Passamaquoddy. So we have elders, we have culture bearers, we have hip hop artists, we have dancers. There are a few people missing from these photos, but we hope everyone will be there on February 4th. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk more about the other programming events of the 3 days.
Yeah, thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, we're really, lifting up the voices of the Community Spirit Award honorees. And, Roberta mentioned Mauna Kea, and really that story really comes from the movement work that was happening in Standing Rock, and then also the movement work. Many of the young folks came to Standing Rock and participated in really kind of direct action, and through some of our other, good friends over at Indian Collective, and, really did some training over there about, what happens when you get arrested. And so we all saw the videos of the, Kumus being arrested up there on the mountain, which we could totally relate to over here coming from Lakota country. So, you know, that power of that story and the strength of, you know, the Native Hawaiians, you know, is so important to the story that's needs to be told at the nation's capital, you know. So that part of the performance really brings light to that, but in an indigenous way of telling our story. And so Jamaica tells the story of, you know, navigating the stars again, you know, on their traditional navigation across the different islands not too much longer before. And Jamaica's also a poet. It's part of the Brave New Voices Youth Speaks organization that really inspired First Peoples Fund to begin to produce the Dances with Words program on Pine Ridge. You know, and that important work down there really stemmed from the poets, Autumn White Eyes, who's also a part of First Peoples Fund, and is leading much of the youth work based on that model processing and adaptation and indigenizing it to the work we do in the Great Plains. And so Autumn is one of the poets who I've seen perform in high school, went on to Dartmouth, went on to Harvard, came home, and oh man, her curriculum is just brilliant. So she is there leading that work, you know, on our behalf, which was inspired again by the Native Hawaiians. So I want to say that along with the, you know, the language work. So the other part of the events happening really, you know, include an educational series. So Emmy, her many horses, joined us, and she is leading the work with a group of young scholars, because we're partnering also with the Kennedy Center on the education side. And they do a really public sourcing of curriculum or materials out to all of the schools. And apparently it's like over 150,000 students. So she's, Roberta, you keep freezing. So she is, you know, really leading that important work, commissioning with some young folks. So they will be, you know, testing that curriculum in very safe ways coming up at the Kennedy Center. And that curriculum will live on through there, and which again will tell some of the stories of the honorees of Bud Lane, who is also a vice chair of his tribe, and his tribe was terminated at a young age, and so they fought for restoration. So that termination part of federal Indian policy that impacted, you know, all of our treaty tribes over here, his tribe was one of those. And so she and her work around the education are weaving those stories, but more importantly, most importantly, Bud's work is around, you know, steward as a steward to the land in the work that he does in community. He's a language speaker. He's the chair of the Northwest Basket Makers Alliance. So those stories will be told through the education side of the Kennedy Center. And then we'll be doing a series of panels and performances on the Millennium Stage for our time there in Washington, D.C. So I will stop there. Roberta, yeah.
Yeah, I think I was frozen for a little bit, Lori, but I know, I'm like, why are they frozen? I think it's me that's frozen. So can you also tell us a bit about the CSA awards that are going to happen at the Kennedy Center? And I don't know if you talked about the flags while I was gone, but maybe about the flags. And I heard you say panels, but
well, I gave the education part of it, so I did do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that's going on. So love to hear about the other thing.
Recognizing the space too, you know, I recall being at the Kennedy Center, and I'm looking up and I'm seeing like these nations of flags, right? And then I see these state flags and I'm like, we need our flags up there. We are putting our flags. So we are partnering with the National Museum of the American Indian, because I didn't realize how hard it would be to get flags from 70 some Community Spirit Award honorees. And it's actually working out. And, you know, we really wanted to do a grand procession into the Kennedy Center through those flags. But we're looking at different ways of being creative now as a result of COVID and COVID checking lines and all of that, you know, for folks who entering the space. So those flags will all be there representing our Community Spirit Award honorees. And we will recognize the Jennifer Easton 2022 Community Spirit Award honorees during the reception, of which 4 of them were selected. They are nominated, like Kumu Vicky said, and they will receive $25,000. So we will be doing that in a reception before the Eisenhower. But I also just want to go back to, really, I've learned so much from, Roberta and the theater side and blocking and all this language I don't know anything about. But it's just been really, and I have more background in film, so I see a little bit differently. But I learned about theater, it's all in process, right? It's a process that can change. So just, it's like writing this novel of this story and watching how that happens with Roberta's ability to just move and just say, you know what, let them tell that story, how they're going to tell it. Or, when they're editing the script, let them edit their own part of the script. And, so I've learned a lot from Roberta and her, 30 years as a theater. No matter where she was working, she was producing theater and creating theater and lifting up folks from BIPOC communities, so she had a 1-person show. And so I thought if she could do a 1-person show, she could do a 50-person show. No, just kidding. So that's what we're doing now. And
I think you're talking about when you saw Kale Wolford's Island, right? Yeah, you saw dear Kale, who many of the people who are watching this know his work as an actor, as a kumu hula, as a hula person, and filmmaker. Yeah, our dear friend. So I just want to, I looking at the chat because Auntie Vicky's just saying hello to everybody she recognizes. It's so great.
Can you see that? I didn't know we could see that.
Yeah, but that's okay.
That's say hi to all my students. I want them to know I'm taking roll.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And now she's going to give extra credit points if you put a question into the chat. So we're going to ask.
I might also just talk about the Millennium Stage and what's happening there with the Halau in New York and the Halau in Hawaii. Why don't you talk about that?
Hi, Kimo. Kimo wanting to know how to get tickets. The tickets will be on sale. Well, they go on later this week, right?
The 19th.
19th, yeah. So check
and
back.
It's all free. It doesn't cost anything. It's all free.
The gala is, there's
no, the reception cost with the food and all that, but the whole thing is free the entire weekend, and the tickets get into the Eisenhower performance.
Yes, and we're doing an educational thing too for high school students and teachers as part of that. So we're gonna, all of my students are gonna be there doing Ohe Kapala, just FYI for all of you. Yeah. Oh, can we drop the link in the chat? John Mario wants to show the educational resources for us teaching folks. Yep.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stacy.
So, yeah, do one of you want to talk about the Millennium performances Lori raised, that there will be, in addition to February 4th, there'll be some other free performances with this?
Yeah, when we first learned about the Millennium Stage, it was 2 stages inside the Kennedy Center, but now the Millennium Stage is a variety of performances and different, presentations throughout the new building, the Reach, which is, it's a huge entire campus now at the Kennedy Center. So we'll have folks that are, both New York and Hawaii will be performing on the Millennium Stage, of which I understood, I think you performed on there before on the Millennium Stage. And then we'll also have the hip hop spoken word artist, be performing. We have Lila June, Tanea Winder, we have Talon Bazil, we have Superman. We just have all these just amazing, just young folks with just amazing voices and amazing talents. And so not only some of them that will have performed on the Eisenhower will move into and perform on the Millennium. And we're having a conversation with Rick West, who is the first head of executive director, president of the National Museum of the American Indian, who went up to the Autry. We'll be in a conversation with Ben Peases, whose beautiful art you saw. on the cover of this launch, and Ben is Crow and an amazing artist. And again, we do much of our work in community and tribal communities. I would say about 88% of our work is directly in tribal communities. So we really, aim to lift up the voices of those that are doing work directly within reservation communities in across the country. And I think I see they can't talk, but if this might be my relative in the room, Deborah Harry. She is an amazing, she used to live, I think she lived in, so Deborah.
Oh,
Thank you,
nice.
Jay. I know you can't hear us, but she's a wonderful person, one of the founders of the 7th Generation Fund, and is an educator now. So that's Deborah. I'm saying hello, aloha.
Aloha, Deborah.
Deborah.
Aloha, Deborah. And if you want to go ahead and talk, you just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, hi, Deborah.
Oh, aloha. Aloha, everybody. Lori, nice to see you. I just am so happy to listen to this conversation and to see friends and carry on.
I feel like we're on Native American calling right now.
It kind of is. The Indigenous world is actually really small.
Deborah's work goes way back with the human genome. I mean, she's just been doing this work for so long and is a professor now. So much of the story we're telling here, Deborah, is around, Indigenous and tribal sovereignty. And she's from Paiute country, and we're actually relatives through marriage.
Beautiful. So I'm looking at the questions, and people are wondering if this event is going to be live streamed for those who cannot attend.
We just found out it is going to be live streamed, and a couple of the Millennium stages are as well. So that's wonderful. And then we're hoping to air it later, still in conversation around that. So we just learned it would be live because of all of the conditions right now. And as Roberta said, tickets go on sale on the 19th. We're taking it day by day, in terms of tickets going up for sale and seeing what's going to happen in the next few weeks. So right now I think Roberta and I alone, are probably up to about 400, 500 hours of just, I can't tell you on the production side how moved I am by the talent again of her team. And you might want to just lift up them, Roberta, because they're folks that she has a long history with. And, it's a very complicated story. It's a very complicated through line, and how you do that with federal Indian policy, starting with Marshall Trilogy, all the way through the South to Oklahoma. And, Brenda Toinita and Wilson Pipeston have been huge influencers, and how we tell that story. Our poet laureate Joy Harjo is a part of the story. Pourier is, really telling the story of the South, and, not only around blues and music, but, just the intersection of Black and Indigenous coming together in North Carolina through the South, through Mississippi. And so, each of them, and that's the beautiful talents of Roberta, really sharing, giving space, so how the script would weave and change, and honoring our Community Spirit Award honorees to tell their story through their eyes. And so I've seen it move, even Monique from Spider Women's Theater, being able to tell the Rappahannock story, in a way of a humorous way, so that it's not so heavy, but it's still like a real story around, the impact of our impact on our communities as a result of decisions that were made in this country.
I think I want to go back to a little bit of Lori's vision of wanting to take over the Kennedy Center, especially after I watched the Kennedy Center Awards, the honors, and how very few Native people are honored in this manner. And so I think that's one of the things about First Peoples Fund, is that they uplift our Native Hawaiian, Native American, Alaskan peoples across the nation to a national audience. And I think that's what's really key for this, is the talk story we had maybe 20 years ago, Laurie, about taking over the Kennedy Center, because Native peoples are very rarely celebrated in that institution. And to be in the same theater where they had the honor, the Kennedy honors, is that same theater at Eisenhower is huge. And to be among that and to celebrate your vision, Laurie, and the work of First Peoples Fund and celebrating your 25-year anniversary. I'm really excited and honored to be a part of that celebration.
Well, I want to say that we did try to, it was supposed to be First Peoples honors, like literally taking everything over, but apparently ABC owns that or something. So we fought for that one for quite a while. And then, you know, it's just funny because I just keep saying, you know, in the dealing with the federal systems and monuments and all of that, is like, we've been in my territory here, we've been dealing with that for 120 years. So each time something is put in front of us, we just kind of say, and then we keep working at it, right? So that's what
having all of our flags being in that hallway. Yeah.
Well, thank you too, because the other thing I've been going through is the archives of the John F. Kennedy Library, and I found this beautiful video. I shared it with Sherry Salway Black, our chair of our board, and Maria Tallchief, you know, in 1962 performed there. Just this beautiful, I mean, by the time you finish watching it, you're just like speechless. Beautiful, beautiful performance. So we're taking some of those images and hanging those as well. And we really wanted to project everything outside of the building, but they also said you can't project on memorials. So we're like, okay, we might project at nighttime when nobody knows. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
But we have all these beautiful images now of leaders. And one of them from my community was Johnson Holy Rock, and those that have been in the movement work and just know this wonderful, kind person, you know, who I looked up to for so long. And he was also the 5th member of our tribe. And he's in the White House, you know, shaking hands with John F. Kennedy. And I said it to my mother and I said, do you know who this is? And she said, oh, that's Johnson. And I was like, you know, she remembered her generation, you know, and he was older than her, and he passed away in 2012 and 93 years old. But so those are the things we want to project that get just kind of put in the back. And so there's images from Alaska to, you know, even Burnett, I want to say Robert, maybe Burnett from Chichangu territory, you know, at the White House meeting on the lawn, and, you know, these leaders. So, and to see the intergenerational knowledge of those that came before us. So we're also lifting up, we have the Wisdom Council, you know, with John Echohawk, Ada Deer, Wes Studi, you know, and others that really guided us, that came before us, you know. And Eloise Cabal was one of the founders of First Peoples Fund in our, you know, our economic self-sufficiency work and our work with CDFIs. And if she was here today, she would be like right there in front leading that grand entry, you know, because she filed the largest lawsuit in this nation against the federal government, you know. So those are the folks we're lifting up, Rick West, and, you know, for their contributions to community for 30 to 50 years, right? And we have to remember those in order to go forward in a good way. So I'll say that.
I wanted to ask Lori about the recordings that we made, you know, in this process. We recorded a number of people. You've mentioned some of them, and then like Winona LaDuke, incredible activist, literally was riding her horse. They were on horseback in protest, and she had to stop at a motel to do this Zoom with us. Ben Sherman talking about Lakota Star knowledge. I mean, really wonderful conversations that happened. And I know that the idea was that this would inform the production, but also be part of the educational materials later. So will that be something that in terms of the curriculum that Emmy Her Many Horses is leading that with the fellows, will you be able to will there be an online presence where others can, where people can share or teachers can come on to that?
Well, I tell you, I am so, again, like these young women, Emmy and Autumn, and get all choked up about these young women because they're just amazing. Emmy, I think Emmy might be in the room. They could probably share too. But Emmy is leading that with so many young folks that are helping to create that narrative. And it's going to be a combination of really being able to tell, the story of not only termination for Bud, but restoration. Not only, Lonnie Hotch working in the Alaska community of Klukwan of 100 tribal members, and, all inspired by, one weaver, Jenny, and she had passed, and Lonnie, they did this healing role to really bring spirit back to community. And it was a result of her trip, out to see the Holocaust Museum, and knowing that so much was extracted from her community. So Lonnie's story just stems from like starting with the fish camp for young girls and mothers sending their kids home from, that might have been in military somewheres, and sending them home to work with Lonnie in community. And I think we have like 6 weavers from that community now of 100 folks. And so we want to lift up that story through the curriculum. That's the quiet movement work that happens, that today now her community is at threat. They have the largest, the Chilkat rivers there, and she opens up always as this, this river runs through my vein. And that's what's so important about, really hearing and understanding and pausing to see what is the narrative we're telling as Native peoples, because we are the caretakers of this land. We are the stewards of this, and we have a relationship to land and place that runs so, so deep. And so when your relatives and others are taken from your community, how do you bring spirit back to community? And so that's the important stories. And I'll say,
Hi, Lori.
Emmy, you can just add to what Roberta was saying. I get so excited.
Yes, so let me know if I'm not answering the question. But we will be, during the weekend, can't commit and say that anything will be streamed, but I'm hopeful that that's something that could be possible. But as time goes on, we will be sharing pieces of that within the curriculum. So we'll be recording as much as we can during the weekend of those sessions to share. And then beyond that, we're also working on interviewing a lot of the community spirit awardees, the artists from the We the Peoples Before event, and then also connecting with others who have been impacted by these artists and culture bearers. And as a part of that, and to connect to the We the Peoples Before event, we're also following a path that connects policy, colonial, federal, state, and local policy, and the impacts that that has had on Indigenous peoples. So we're utilizing a content pathway that talks about dispossession, so how these policies have impacted our communities, adaptation, how we held on to our practices, reclamation, how we kind of brought them back to the front and began sharing them amongst our community members who may not have had access, and resilience, which is a lot of the work that we see the community spirit awardees doing in their communities. So we're following this content pathway that always leads back to that dispossession, and how the dispossession of our cultural practices, our language, our ways of being have impacted the community. And initially, so the curriculum won't be released after the event, because we are going through a process to make sure that all of the lessons that we're developing are effective and meaningful for both Native and non-Native youth all over the country. But we will be slowly releasing information and also looking for partners to pilot some of that as well, if there are educators who are interested in trying the curriculum and then giving us feedback. Roberta, did I have a question?
Emmy will have to introduce you to John Mario Sevilla, who's on the Halavai board, but is on this Zoom as well, who is just doing such wonderful things with education. And I see that there's a question that came up from one of my hula sisters who always asks very brilliant questions, Erica, asked, do you find that this event has spurred interest in collaboration from groups that are protesting injustice? I can't help but think the positive, proud way in which this celebration is woven together inspires many others. So yeah, would you, either of you want to address that?
You know, I feel just inspired, you know, and all the different kind of tiers and layers, you know, of this. And I think, you know, the education piece is so, so important to have an ongoing, you know, life. And I think in terms of inspiring, you know, others, we have the Intercultural Leadership Institute, you know, which is a movement of folks that are in the arts and culture sector who do social justice work, like Kumu Vicky is one of the partners. National Association of Latino Arts and Culture is one of the partners, Alternate Roots and SIP Culture, and I think I said NALOC. So that is a national program that started over a, you know, I think we're in our fourth circle now, but we really bring the fellows into that program directly into tribal communities and to Hawaii. And so, you know, for me, that part of it is, it really speaks to building these cross community, across Black and Indigenous and other communities. And so that's also helping to frame, you know, this story. And so we've, you know, we'll continue to do that work through ELI going into the future. And that's a fellowship.
But I think also, you know, I've gone to Standing Rock with Laurie.
Been, you know,
yeah, and many of our Native Hawaiian communities that have been involved with activism have gone to Standing Rock and come back with Ike, with knowledge about. I want to uplift Andre Perez, who was there for weeks at Standing Rock and participated in civil disobedience, but learned, you know, and then came back to Mauna Kea and became the trainer for civil disobedience and how to do this in a peaceful manner. So we adopted many of the tactics that we had learned from Standing Rock at Mauna Kea. We are also, you know, I am anyway, have met with some of the organizer, Andre and Kalehua Krug, around the Red Hill tainted water issue that's going on with the Navy. So having gone early morning to Oli and prepare ho'okupu and build an ahu for Kane, for the restoration of fresh water. So we're advocating for the same things in our own communities and find strength in partnering with each other, whether it's a direct partnership or just, you know, knowing and appreciating and helping each other wherever we can. So I think this is something that we've been working on together. It's the moral support that we get from each other, as well as, I mean, I know I can call Laurie and ask her for something and she'll be right there. Same thing, if she calls, I will be right there. And any of our ELI partners, that would be NALAC and Alternate Roots. We've grown, it's a national collaboration for artists and arts organizations that are at the intersection of arts and social justice, using our art for social justice issues, for protection of our environment, for protection of our natural resources, for protection of our native rights. And all of the organizations that are going to be at We the Peoples before have all contributed to that efforts. And I know that that's one of the things that I get to meet at this event. I'm going to meet artists that I haven't yet met, you know, that Laurie has had the opportunity and Roberta has had the opportunity to go to their communities and work with them. But I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to meeting these artists. I'm looking forward to establishing relationships. And I think that's one of the really positive things about our work together. The three of us here in this room have been able to do that work collectively.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of it, when you were talking about meeting the other artists, is that each of these artists really does represent wider networks, and many of them direct involvement in various issues, right? So when we look at things like the attack on sovereignty through the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, you know, bringing to consciousness certain things that get buried in the news, but that are going to have really major impact on the sovereignty of Native peoples. You know, when we look at how somebody like Sharon Day connects missing, murdered Indigenous women's issue with issues of the environment, and as a woman water walker, what that means. You know, when we look at the issues of the mass graves that have been turned up at these former boarding schools, and, you know, the powerful bringing home of relatives, and then how, you know, how that whole history of intergenerational and generational trauma in Americanizing people, when we look at the issues of, you know, termination, these different eras, right? But on the other side of that, we have, like you mentioned when you were talking about the Wisdom Council, you mentioned Ada Deer. So we have somebody like Wade Fernandez talking about the restoration of the Menominee people, you know, rights and recognition, but also what that really means to the forest and the environment. So Laura, you asked me before to also lift up the production team, and I want to say that I put together a BIPOC plus production team. I really want to give a big shout out to Genevieve Fowler, who, I don't know, she was an Art Change Us person, but I think she's a First Peoples Fund person now. But she has been the assistant producer to Lori, and she, with Kenny Ramos, is one of the 2 assistant directors. But our team, Kumu Vicky, you will know Taran Moore. Taran was my production manager for the 2 pilots I did for the Liliuokalani Trust in Hawaii. Also, he's my choreographer for Tri-Step Trip. And Jono Sato, a projection designer, Max Urasmendi, the lighting designer, Tanya Uriega, the Oriano, the scenic designer, Talon Bazil, and Superman, the sound designers, and Mary Catherine Nagel, playwright who is writing some of the interlinking text and monologues. But even, you know, in terms of those really wonderful creative artists, each of them is connected to wider networks for change. So, for example, Taran also works with IABD, the International Association of Blacks in Dance. Joan works with Youth Speaks and with the Consortium of Asian American Theaters. Tanya with Camposanto. You know, we have Nalakeros, we have Nalak alum in our team. So, you know, I think in terms of just them then bringing their networks, and yeah, I think what Erika mentioned is very, very profound, because we do see, we are already experiencing that ripple effect. And I don't know, for me to see something like this out of space, like the Kennedy Center, that I would just not have ever imagined that happening, you know, for Lori to have that bold leadership to say, we want to take that Hall of Flags and put our Native Nation flags there. And then, you know, there was discussion, well, okay, for a week, for a month, you know, for a year, and then them, I believe, saying that they would make a permanent installation. But I love Lori, because we got all excited. Permanent installation, that's amazing. And Lori, the first thing she said is, and can you take those other 50 flags down? So I'm like, I think that's pushing a little too far. When the real takeover happens, Lori, you're gonna get your wish. But it's phenomenal to transform the environment. And for those of you who haven't been to the Kennedy Center for a while, Lori mentioned they have built this incredible extension campus. It's on the same grounds, but it has spaces for rehearsal, it has classrooms, it has some performance spaces. So for those of you who knew the Millennium program, there's a Millennium stage, but now the Millennium stage is a traveling stage. So the Millennium events happen outside, they happen in the Justice Forum and the Reach, they happen in different places, which is really exciting, that whole idea of bringing free performance to the public. Yeah, and I guess I'm going to ask if you have any final closing mana'o, Kumu Vicky, any thoughts, Lori, as we wrap it up here?
I'm really, go ahead, Laurie, sorry. You should have the last word.
Kumu Vicky, you always have the last word. You go first. Okay, yeah. So then I go first because you always have the last word. So I just want to say that, you know, I think it was Erica's question, but, you know, really getting back to, I think the common thread in the future of the work going forward with our Community Spirit Award honorees, with, you know, those that we fund, Sharon Day's organization, Liz DeCola, you know, the Water Walkers, you know, I think the common thread for movement work within the arts and social justice is around, you know, the rights of water as life. You know, and I think because they're all threatened right now, as I was listening to, I was just looking at each of the honorees and realizing the direct impact that, you know, in the village of Klukwan, you know, the largest eagle preserve in the world is there. And the eagles all come to the Chilkat River because it's just low enough where they could see the tails of the salmon. And so, you know, and that river is currently be threatened now. You know, by a mine up the road. You know, Winona speaking about Line 3 directly impacts all of the work of Sharon and Liz and, you know, the women water walkers that were inspired by Josephina. So she's a part of that story. So I think the voice going forward is really, you know, the rights to the water, you know, to protect the water and the women's role in that, as well as the fires, you know, because many of our weavers cared for those lands and they practiced controlled burns to protect the medicines. And then they were no longer could do that with the state forestry offices and like that. So, but coincidentally, now those very same offices are asking for the advice of the weavers. And you have the California basket weavers that has been around for 40 years now, and those women been protecting those natural resources. So, you know, again, it's water and the land and, you know, really the women's role in all of that. And we have to lift that up and support that. And so I think that's what's about the work going forward.
So in closing, I just want to thank Laurie and Roberta for including me and Pa'i in this adventure. We're very excited about seeing everybody in Washington, DC, and creating new opportunities to collaborate and to share our culture with and take over the Kennedy Center with all of you.
Roberta, the one thing I forgot to say is the filmmakers are all, there's 6 women filmmakers doing shorts around these themes too. So just want to say that. So there's a lot of exciting.
I saw that on the Kennedy site. There was a language panel, there was the films. Really, the sessions look amazing. I'm going to be just coasting on that day. So anyway, thank you, everybody. I really want to thank Lori and to Vicky for joining us today, and all of you for taking the time, and really thank my colleagues at Halavai, especially Stacy Onipa'a Young. And I think, Stacy, if you have any other closing thoughts or announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everybody. You guys get to see. But you know, mahalo nui. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. One, for not only doing We the Peoples before and sharing your mana'o and everybody who you've met through a legacy of nonprofit work that all of you ladies have done to better our generations to come. So not only thank you from us personally, but you know, our children's children. So mahalo nui. We really appreciate it. There were a few questions and answers about, hey, will you be taking this out on a national tour so we can go and spread all of this mana'o throughout the nation and the world? And I'm sure that that's well on the horizon. But also just to remind everybody, all of the links to the educational material, to We the Peoples Before, ticketing, and also First Peoples Fund will be up on our Halavai website, halavai.org. And also you can go and check out our YouTube channel for any of this, for this Mauli Ola and any other Mauli Ola that you may have missed. We will see you hopefully in a few weeks over at the cutting room to check out the Masters of Hawaiian Guitar, where we'll have another board member playing, a very talented board. Mahalo from the deepest parts of our hearts, Roberta Mapuana, for putting this together and continuing to just improve Halavai and our New York community.
Thank you,
Mahalo nui,
everybody.
please.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Aloha.
Aloha, Plamaye.
Aloha, malama pono.